It was the fall of 1982 in a small town called Cedar Grove, where the fog seemed to have a permanent residence and the nights always seemed longer than usual. Mary Thompson, then 28, had lost her husband a little over 6 months earlier, the victim of a truck accident on an icy road. Since then, she had barely been able to sleep. She worked as a cashier at a supermarket that barely paid the bills, and at home she divided an exhausting routine between taking care of her children, 3 children ranging in age from 2 to 7, and finding some way to keep the refrigerator stocked with something other than stale bread and watered-down milk. That rainy Thursday had seemed like just another one of those days she was trying to survive when it all happened. She had stopped briefly at a gas station on the highway near the edge of town after picking up some leftovers from a bakery that usually gave away food close to closing time. She was wearing a navy blue coat, frayed at the elbows, and her hands were shaking more from the cold than from fear. As she refueled her old car, a Ford that made strange noises every time she turned the key, she noticed a young man in his early 20s in a wet uniform looking at the gas station as if trying to find a solution in the impossible. He looked exhausted, but determined not to show weakness. Mary saw him approach the cashier and try to explain something, showing his empty wallet and asking for any kind of help. The attendant refused straight away. "No money, no gas," he said without looking up. The young man turned around, soaked to the skin, and leaned against the corner of the wall. Mary watched the scene for a few more seconds until something inside her screamed louder than the fear of scarcity. She walked over to him, took out the $20 she had in her pocket, the only money she had left to feed her children for the next 2 days, and held it out firmly, saying only, "Go home." The young man stood there for a few seconds, staring at the woman he had never seen before. His uniform was covered in mud, his hair was dripping wet, and his face betrayed more than just tiredness. It was the expression of someone who had lost faith in people until that moment. He tried to refuse, saying he couldn't accept, but Mary insisted, "I'm not asking you if you want it, I'm telling you to go." With tears in his eyes, he took the money, mumbled a nearly silent "thank you," and ran to get gas. They didn't exchange names. She got back in the car, started the engine with difficulty, and as the windshield wipers did their best to keep the rain away, Mary saw the young man wave through the car window. She nodded back briefly, then put the car in first gear and drove home, never imagining that that moment would forever be etched in his memory and, indirectly, change the course of her own life. The years passed as they do in the life of any ordinary person, without major headlines, but with daily battles that cannot be photographed. Mary remained steadfast, even when it seemed the world was determined to test her. She raised her children practically alone, facing power outages, unexpected illnesses, and entire days when lunch consisted of black coffee with flour. Time, as always, took its toll. Her hair, darkened by time, gave way to grey strands. The house lost its shine, and the children grew up and followed different paths, each trying to give back to their mother the minimum of the strength she invested in them. But Mary, stubborn as always, refused help. She was never one to ask, and until the end, she believed that generosity was only valuable if it was offered, not begged for. She grew old, with the same determination she had on that rainy night, still holding in her heart the certainty that even with little, she had done the right thing. On a Tuesday morning, in the year 2022, Mary woke to the sound of knocking on her front gate. The house, now with its paint peeling and its roof whining with every gust of wind, looked as if it hadn't had a visitor in weeks. The town had changed too. Cedar Grove had aged with her, emptier streets, closed shops, and neighbors who were no longer the same. Mary got up slowly, shuffling to the door, still wearing the light blue robe she wore every morning. When she opened it, she found 2 men in uniform and a woman in uniform standing at the gate, next to a black police car with gold trim. She frowned in confusion. She hadn't been expecting anyone, and her heart raced in the reflex of someone who'd spent her life waiting for bad news. "Ms. Mary Thompson, one of them asked, his posture stiff, but his voice surprisingly soft. She nodded, and then he simply said, "You changed my life 40 years ago, and today we came to pay you back." Before Mary could respond, the gate opened and a veritable entourage began to arrive. Trucks, vans, military vehicles, and even local residents whose names she could barely remember. Some were carrying tools, others were carrying paint, potted plants, gardening equipment, lumber, and even a new rocking chair. The normally quiet street became a bustling hustle and bustle of people who seemed to know exactly what they were doing. In the midst of it all, she recognized his face, the young man from the rainy night, now with gray hair, decorated, wearing the uniform of a general in the United States Armed Forces. He walked up to her, respectfully removed his cap and said, looking her in the eye, "You gave me everything you had without knowing me. That has never left my mind. Today it is my turn to do it for you." Mary, still in shock, just put her hand to her mouth, unable to say anything. She was so emotional that it seemed like her body had even forgotten how to breathe properly. As the volunteers spread out across the property, Mary was led to a makeshift chair on the sidewalk, covered with a warm blanket brought by one of the neighbors. She watched everything in silence, as if she were watching a movie that, by some miracle, was about her own life. One group began to remove the broken tiles from the roof. Another painted the exterior walls a soft shade of pale yellow, almost the same as the original house in the 1980s. A young Marine installed new gutters with precision, while an elderly man, the owner of the hardware store on the corner, sanded the wood of the doorframe, saying that it was the least he could do. The general remained nearby, humbly coordinating, but always looking at Mary, as if checking to see if she was still okay or if this moment was really happening. And there she was, immersed in a mixture of astonishment, gratitude, and a kind of joy that only appears when the soul realizes that, in fact, it was worth having been who one is. Inside the house, the activity was as intense as outside. The kitchen floor, which had previously creaked with every step, was ripped out and replaced with a new, durable, easy-to-clean covering. Cabinets were restored, the bathroom pipes, which had been leaking for over a decade, were finally replaced, and even a new refrigerator appeared, full of fresh food donated by local merchants. One of Mary's grandsons, who had come in a hurry upon hearing the news, was helping to paint the room where he had slept during his childhood vacations, excited to see everything taking shape. The smell of fresh paint, sanded wood, and freshly brewed coffee made by one of the neighbors created a welcoming, almost surreal atmosphere. In the midst of all this, Mary didn't ask for anything, didn't complain about anything. She just watched with teary eyes and a slight smile on the corner of her mouth, as if she was finally reaping what she had sown on a night forgotten by most, but remembered by those who really matter. By mid-afternoon, the garden, which had been overgrown with weeds and dried flowers for years, began to regain its color. A group of children from the local school appeared with small pots in their hands, each planting a flower in the name of an act of kindness they had seen or experienced. A retired gardener, a friend of the general, tended the flower beds with the delicacy of someone who understands that the earth also needs care. The old porch swing, which had threatened to fall apart with every breeze, was reinforced with new wood and painted white. A cushion embroidered with the name Mary was carefully placed on the seat, as if sealing this symbolic gift. And then, in the midst of it all, the general approached her again. With teary eyes, the same eyes from 1982, now wiser, he crouched down in front of her and handed her a small metal piggy bank with a screw-top lid and a handwritten inscription, "Chain of Goodness. It started with you." Mary held the piggy bank in her hands as if it were a relic. It wasn't pretty or expensive, but it held something that was worth more than any new object they could give her: recognition. "This safe will stay here on your porch," the general explained, "and anyone in the community who needs something, food, medicine, help with the electric bill, can come here. But also, anyone who can help can leave something inside." It was simple, practical, real. Mary hugged the safe to her chest, closed her eyes for a few seconds, and then answered in the hoarse voice of someone who had cried more than she would have liked that day. "It will be full. I know it will." And at that moment, it wasn't just her house that was being restored. It was the faith of everyone watching. Because seeing someone who gave away the little they had get back after so long made even the most skeptical people reconsider what it really means to be rich. At dusk, the sky began to open up, revealing a burnt orange that took over the clouds, as if the day wanted to end in style. The street was full of laughter, conversation, and even music. One of the merchants brought a speaker and played old classics while everyone was still working on the final details. Children ran across the new lawn, now green and trimmed, and some residents began to bring small offerings to Mary: a cornmeal cake, a hand-knitted blanket, a framed picture of the old cedar grove. Simple things, but full of feeling. And there, in the midst of all that activity, Mary began to become something she herself had never imagined, a symbol of hope. Someone who, with a silent gesture on a forgotten night, inspired a movement that was now spreading like roots in good soil. At one point, someone from the renovation crew called Mary over to show her one last surprise. She climbed down the 3 steps from the porch with the help of one of her neighbors and walked around to the side of the house. There, where there had been a stained and cracked wall, was now a mural. It was simple but powerful. It depicted a young woman handing a $20 bill to a soldier in the rain. In the bottom corner of the image was a phrase, "Small gestures change destinies." Mary stood there for a few minutes without saying a word. She just stared. Her silence said more than any speech. The image was clear, but its meaning was even greater. This mural wasn't just hers. It was the city's. It was a reminder to anyone who passed by that sometimes it's precisely what we do when no one is looking that changes everything. As night fell, Mary returned to the porch. Now, with new lights softly illuminating the space, she sat on the restored swing and looked around with a look that mixed tiredness, fulfillment, and peace. The garden in front of her breathed life, and even with the buzz of the neighborhood starting to die down, she felt as if the heart of the city had started beating again there, right in front of her house. The general approached one last time, this time without his uniform, just like an ordinary man who had never forgotten where he came from. They didn't say much. They sat side by side in silence while the sound of crickets filled the room. It was as if no words were necessary. Everything that needed to be said had already been said or experienced. Sometimes the greatest gratitude is this: being there, present, when it matters most. Little by little, people started to leave. The street became quiet again, but now with a different energy. It was as if something invisible had been fixed in that place, and maybe it had. Mary held the safe in her lap and had already made sure to put the first $5 inside. "For good luck," she said, smiling at one of her grandchildren before he left. The atmosphere around her was different, but she was still who she had always been, someone who didn't expect anything in return, but who received much more than she gave, precisely because of that. The difference now was that her kindness was no longer hidden in a memory. It was there, visible, planted in every flower, hanging from every light bulb, painted on the wall, and vibrating in people's hearts. And Cedar Grove, which for years had been just another forgotten town on the map, now had something to tell. Days later, the porch swing would become the new meeting point on the street. People would stop by to leave something in the safe, have a coffee with Mary, or simply listen to her stories. She became a point of reference, not because she had done something great, but precisely because she had done what many would not do, even if they could. That simple act, taken in silence 40 years earlier, was now inspiring new actions. A young man from the neighborhood, upon seeing what had happened, started a project to deliver basic food baskets. A couple decided to reopen the small community library, and the safe, that simple metal safe with a screw top, was never empty again. Sometimes it would overflow so much that they had to make a new collection every week. Mary didn't want any tributes, she just wanted to see people helping each other, and that, more than any public recognition, was what gave her peace. In the last scene of that unforgettable day, Mary was swinging slowly, watching the garden illuminated by the yellow light from the porch. Her eyes were calm, her chest light. She held a cup of tea in her hands, and the safe remained there next to her feet, full. The general had already left, but he left a handwritten letter, kept in the kitchen drawer, saying, "You were my foundation when I had no ground." She reread those words from time to time, always with a discreet smile. And so, without fanfare, without a camera, without a stage, Mary's story became a living part of Cedar Grove. It wasn't the money nor the renovation of the house that changed her life. It was the confirmation that even on the darkest days, a single choice of kindness can brighten an entire future. And on that restored swing, with the soft sound of the wind and leaves, Mary knew the chain of goodness was just beginning.